Hi everybody, welcome back. Glad you could tune in again. As one or two of you might know, a number of years ago I used to be a scientist. Way back in the 1990s, I did doctoral work in a fairly obscure branch of experimental physics, and for a while I was thinking about pursuing that kind of area as a career before things took a slightly different turn. And what that's meant over the years is that I've had a number of fascinating conversations with people about the relationship between science and the Christian faith. Sometimes those conversations have been with people who aren't Christians, who may be from a scientific discipline, from a scientific background themselves, and in some cases have been astonished that somebody who's got a scientific background could possibly believe the things that I believe as a Christian. Sometimes those conversations have been with other Christians who have wanted to ask questions about how I perceive the relationship between science and the Christian faith. And sometimes those Christians have been a little bit unnerved by challenges that have been put to them by others, perhaps unbelieving friends, challenging them on purported scientific grounds as though there's some deep-seated conflict between science and the Christian faith, and really that science has proved that Christianity isn't true or something of that sort. And so what this has meant over the years is that those conversations have sometimes led to opportunities for me to speak on the subject, and I thought it might be helpful just to share a few of those thoughts with you. In case it's helpful for you in talking with friends or relatives or others who aren't Christians but have come from some kind of scientific background, or perhaps if you just have questions yourself about the relationship between the discipline of science, or the sciences I suppose, and the Christian faith. So at the outset I should explain what it is that I'm wanting to talk about and what I'm not going to be talking about. I'm not going to be proposing that there is a conflict between science and the Christian faith. There is no conflict between the discipline of science and the Christian faith. There is a conflict between the worldview that underpins much of the scientific activity in the secular world at the present time, that is what we might call reductive materialism, I'll come to that in a moment or two, and the worldview of the Christian faith, which we might call Christian Theism. There is definitely a conflict between those two worldviews, our worldview, Christian Theism, and the reductive materialist worldview of many in the secular scientific establishment. But there is no conflict at all between Christian Theism and the pursuit of science. What I want to argue and try and demonstrate to you is that a Christian theist worldview actually allows a scientist to explain more of the world around them than a secular reductive materialist worldview would allow them to explain. Think of the two worldviews as platforms upon which a scientist might stand. If the scientist stood on the secular reductive materialist platform, he'd be able to explain a good deal about the world. But if the scientist stood on the Christian theist platform, they would be able to explain a huge amount more about the world. So my claim then would be that the Christian faith actually provides a more comprehensive framework from within which to do science, and actually allows science to explain more of the world around us. And what I'm going to do in the next few devotions, Lord willing, is just to get into a few of those issues, areas of thought or the study of the world around us in relation to which a Christian can explain things that a secular reductive materialist cannot. But before we get into that, we should just explain our terms a little bit. What do we mean by Christian theism more precisely, and what do we mean by reductive materialism? That's an expression that some of you may not have come across. Christian theism first, this you will be familiar with, but let me restate it, and particularly in its relation to the physical world around us. As Christians, we believe that God created and sustains all things that exist. That's theism. It's distinct from deism, which is the view that God created all things but then let them go off running on their own, rather than like a clockmaker making a clock, winding it up, and then just setting it on the mantelpiece to carry on doing its own thing. That's deism. Theists, Christian theists, believe that the triune God made and sustains all things in being. For the theist, the world is more like an orchestra that the Lord God is conducting. He's intimately involved with all the motions of all the players. It's not that the world carries on doing its own little thing, it's that the Lord sustains it in being all the time. In fact, the image of the orchestra doesn't grant God enough involvement. He's far more involved than the conductor of an orchestra, but you get the picture. Now, what that means for the pursuit of science, from a Christian theist standpoint, is that it's possible to investigate the way in which God upholds the universe. We describe those in the sciences as physical laws, but properly speaking, they're not actually laws. They are the ways in which God upholds all things under normal circumstances. So God upholds the planets and the stars and matter on a large scale in such a way that we observe regularities in the attraction between masses, and we call that the law of gravity, and we can write down an equation and describe how systems move under the force of gravity. But the law that we're referring to is really rather a description of what God is doing most of the time. And because God is faithful, because God upholds the universe in a consistent way, what that means is that those laws, quote unquote, remain constant, and we can explore them by conducting the same experiments again and again, and the laws don't change, the laws remain the same because God is doing the same thing consistently. And the whole discipline of science rests on that fact. That when I do an experiment in Britain today and then you do the same experiment in Texas tomorrow, if we do it under the same conditions, then we'll get the same result because God is upholding the universe consistently as a reflection of his faithfulness. So that's Christian theism. What about secular reductive materialism then? Well, materialism refers to the view that matter, or perhaps equivalently matter and energy, are the only things that exist. It differs from theism in its denial that God exists. There is only matter, or matter and energy, and if you know a bit of physics, you'll know why those two are technically equivalent in some sense. What that means then is that matter has its own properties of built-in existence, so to speak. It doesn't need to be created. It comes into being through physical processes which are inherent in it, and it's sustained in existence through capacities which it has in itself. If matter turns into energy, as sometimes it does, then that again is a consequence of physical laws, so to speak, built into the things that exist. There's no God controlling things, according to materialism. And reductive materialism is a way of talking about how materialists go about explaining things in the world. Roughly speaking, reductive materialism says that the way that you explain a complex system is by reducing it, hence reductive, to simpler component parts. Take a human body, for example. You're looking at me here. That's a fairly complicated biological system. And what the reductive materialist would say is, well, you can explain that complex biological system by breaking it down into the workings of individual cells, and then within each individual cell you'll find all kinds of biochemical processes going on, and enzyme reactions, and diffusion through liquids, and molecules reacting with each other and turning into other molecules. And if you go down, zoom in even further, you'll find that you can analyse those chemical processes in terms of physics and the smaller scale interactions between smaller units of matter and so on. So roughly speaking, the reductive materialist says this material world can be subject to a kind of hierarchical analysis whereby the function and operation of complex systems can be understood exhaustively, in principle, by reducing them to simpler systems, and the simpler the system is, the more easy it is to understand. So from those building blocks, you can then build up a comprehensive picture of everything that exists. That's reductive materialism, contrasted with Christian theism. And as I said, my contention has been over the years, and remains today, that the Christian theist can explain things about the universe that the reductive materialist cannot. And in the next video, we will look at the first of those features of the universe when we turn to the most astonishing thing about the created universe, arguably speaking, that is the human mind. But we'll leave that for next time. Now, the Lord bless you, and bye for now.